Initially, I was very reluctant to watch this movie. Makoto Shinkai's artistic vision is fantastic, but it seemed to me that he had peaked with Your Name. Like many others, I believed that this movie would provide a similar experience. Many, if not all of his movies are quite alike, and though they might be good films, I have no idea. I feel like I already understand his vision. However, I did not want to judge Suzume based on Shinkai's past works. I wanted to evaluate it as a standalone movie and determine if it provided a unique and worthwhile experience on its own. My general sentiment is that this is not just a slightly above average movie, simply because of how the story is structured and paced. As a reminder, the first act is the introduction phase of a movie, where the main characters, the setting, and the world of the story are established. This act usually starts with the inciting incident, a key event that disrupts everything and throws the protagonist into the main conflict. This is where Suzume essentially starts the movie by removing the keystone, which turns into a cat and runs away, letting out a primordial entity. This incident is followed by other setups, and I will quickly go through what these are. So, these are the basis of Souta and Suzume's relationship and their interdependence, a familiarity with the danger, which is the primordial entity trying to escape through the gates, the foundation for Suzume being a road trip movie, followed by an escalation of the danger to wrap up the first act. How Souta and Suzume's relationship is portrayed is important, because this is where they could have chosen to go the full romance route, but they did not. I appreciate this because romance is not entirely what motivates Suzume to go on this journey and help Souta. That's why I don't largely view this as a romance movie. If she was mostly motivated by romance, her involvement in the events of the movie wouldn't make sense, because no one is going to believe that Suzume is risking her life just because she's a good person and has feelings for a good-looking guy she just met. The drive behind why she would risk her life to stop this entity needs to be multidimensional. Yes, she has romantic feelings for Souta, but her desire to help him is also reinforced by the fact that she's the one who started the events of the movie, accidentally letting out this entity. Because of her, Japan is on the verge of destruction now. There is this underlying sense of guilt and responsibility that propels her to take those risks, such as hanging off the Ferris wheel, or jumping off the bridge to get on the creature which takes her hundreds of feet into the air. Why she does things makes sense. So there needs to be equal moments of slower and high-octane moments that meaningfully progress the story and the characters. I can appreciate that the writers of the movie understand this. Let's look at when Suzume meets the girl who gives her a ride and a place to stay. We get moments of them developing a friendship. Interactions like these are completely meaningless on their own, and initially I was confused as to where the movie was going. What is important is that the place where she meets this person has a gate, and that needs to be closed. This new friend she has created facilitates her success by giving her a ride and a place to stay and so on. Suzume's interaction with this person goes into the road trip basket, if you will, and her closing the gate in that location goes into the story basket. This slower and faster moment together goes into the good pacing basket. Observe that these locations are not random or arbitrary because the cat is leading them specifically to these doors. And it is safe to assume that these doors are also opening due to Suzume's actions. A good first act needs to sell you the world, the premise, and the characters, among other smaller things. The premise of the show revolves around how this primordial being is creating large-scale disasters. What we perceive to be normal earthquakes, but are actually created by these things escaping through the doors. Earthquakes and tsunamis are very prevalent in the Japanese landscape. It is reported that about 20% of worldwide earthquakes of magnitude 6 or greater occur in Japan, and from the digging that I did, this statistic seems to be legit. Hence, this premise is easily understood by the target audience, which is not us as much as it is Japanese people. The potential danger and damage caused by earthquakes are better contextualized for them. This means that the idea of tension and stakes hit home because they're better familiar with the real-world damage caused by it. The reason I bring this up is because the core problem in the movie, which is Suzume trying to stop this entity, may not seem exciting or interesting to a Western audience, but from Makoto Shinkai's perspective, choosing to write this story makes a lot of sense. Also, let's not forget that Suzume is a road trip movie. Along the way, we see her meet Good Samaritans who help her realize her goals. We learn of the beautifully portrayed towns and cities she visits, and we get a glimpse into some of the lives of the inhabitants while progressing her journey. Some time in the first and the third act are dedicated to really enhance the atmosphere of the movie, whether it be through the amazing visuals or the great soundtracks, a signature of Makoto Shinkai. The danger in the second act is heightened as the primordial entity is about to destroy Tokyo. One of the most important moments of the movie occurs when we, along with the characters, realize that Souta is the keystone that could have stopped it all along. The cat did not reveal this information until seconds before the destruction was about to occur. This is another indicator of the thoughtfulness behind the storytelling, something you will not find in just an above-average anime. Had we known that Souta was the key, the destruction of Tokyo as a major event would not have worked, because we would have already been anticipating his sacrifice, thus making the outcome of the event predictable. The very close timing of this reveal heightens the sense of panic, not only in the characters but also in the audience. It puts Suzume in a dilemma which she has literally no time to solve. She doesn't have time to weigh her outcomes but needs to act immediately. I also want to praise the soundtrack that accompanies this moment. It creates a dark and sinister atmosphere, perfectly capturing the impending death and destruction that would have followed had the entity successfully landed on Tokyo. The third act fully embraces the road trip theme. The characters, including Sota's friend and Suzume's aunt, journey towards the final resolution. The story comes full circle as they return to the location of the first door Suzume opened, a place where time and space are fluid, something like that. This connection between the start and the end of the movie is very overplayed in Shinkai's work, and I know at least some people were disappointed by this, but at least it provided some narrative coherence and closure. Despite some loss of tension from the second act, the third one ramps up the visual spectacle. How the movie is structured overall has a positive effect on the pacing. You might disagree, but I did not find the beginning of the movie boring when I realized that it was a road trip. The balance between the slower character-building moments and faster action-packed sequences is what makes the pacing effective. The pacing also benefits from the three-act structure. Each act ends with an escalation of the plots, and that's exactly what you want to see. The first one being the Ferris wheel gate, the second one being the Tokyo gate, and the third one being the resolution and the climax. This helps to maintain the narrative momentum. Let's talk about other aspects that a mediocre anime would simply not have. The quality of the backstory or the flashback. I recently watched Mashal out of sheer curiosity, and man, the first episode was awful. One of the crimes it commits is showing a flashback in the first episode. And if you don't know why this is bad, let me explain. I do not care about a character's past if I do not care about the character. And when it's the very first episode of a show, I certainly do not care about the character. It doesn't matter how sad the backstory is. Also, good flashbacks will always meaningfully tie back to the main story. You will see that many anime flashbacks only exist to provide a soft story about a character, but on their own hold absolutely no meaning. Well, this is not always true, and some rare standalone flashbacks are amazing. My favorite one of all time being Law's backstory from One Piece. The flashback in Suzume shows how she received the chair from her mother, and what meaning it holds for her. This is not placed towards the first half of the movie, but at the end of the second act. This means that at this point into the movie, I am invested in the characters, therefore I care about this story. Because the chair is a gift from her late mother, and it holds Souta inside it, and it is a keystone that will stop the entity from escaping, it is a very significant object to Suzume. This object is not just a MacGuffin. I do want to bring up the difference between this particular entity and Ganon from Breath of the Wild, because both are seemingly unintelligent primordial beings that will destroy everything. Even though it was an absolutely amazing experience, Breath of the Wild had some glaring issues, mainly the story and the characters. Ganon as an entity existed only to be defeated by Link. Outside of that, its existence was completely static, trapped in a particular area of the map while you take your sweet time exploring the other areas. These are the instances where storytelling in video games and other mediums become different. I'm not saying Breath of the Wild story is bad because it's a video game story. Storytelling in different mediums is different and they all have their pros and cons. In Suzume, the primordial creature, unlike Ganon, compels the protagonists to deal with it. Suzume and Souta are forced to confront it time and time again. This not only maintains good pacing throughout the movie, but makes sure that meaningful conflict is created. The main characters cannot take their sweet time dealing with this threat. This keeps the audience within the pocket of the movie and does not meander in its storytelling. For instance, all their road trip destinations had a gate which they needed to close. Once again, I am comparing two similar story elements from two different contexts, that being a movie and a video game. My argument stands because Ganon, specifically from Breath of the Wild, no matter what storytelling medium or context you would put him in, would be a bad antagonistic force. I'm using Ganon as a reference of what not to do when writing a seemingly unintelligent primordial being that will destroy everything. I do want to address moments in the movie that lack explanation. Whether or not I nitpick details relies on the quality of the overall experience. For Suzume, all the question marks were well within my suspension of disbelief. For example, how young Suzume can go to the other plane even though she does not have a key, or how the cat turned back into a keystone even though it was clearly stated that it can't turn back into a keystone, or how she could summon the door at the end of the movie. All these instances are arbitrary and don't have any explanations. To me, this does not matter because the journey Suzume goes through and the challenges she overcomes is earned satisfactorily. These plot holes, if you will, does not affect the heart of the movie, and that's why it does not really bother me.